adoption and some of the barriers to adoption, drivers adoption, I think, which are, I'm sure all of us agree, the pivotal role that these play. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. And I think I'll be done then, I promise. And like Ram said, there's only 3 sessions. I know it's been a long day since 8:30, but I promise I have interesting stories and like something really to learn and take away. Great. Sorry about that. My name is Shalmali Ghaisas, and I'm a senior associate at the Busara Center for Behavioral Economics. For the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to present our learnings from the research we have been undertaking with smallholder farmers at Busara. Busara is a research advisory and design firm. We specialize in applying behavioral science in the global south. Essentially, we study why and how people behave the way they do, identifying the context-specific factors that drive their decisions and behaviors. And then we use these insights to try and design local, user-centered, contextualized solutions. With the support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation under the Digital Grant, we have been working with different providers of digital products and services to research on barriers to adoption and use and try to design and test solutions around them. Throughout this process, we undertake a 3-step approach. Some of you might have attended the previous Farmerline presentation, so apologies if I'm repeating the next bit. First, we start off with like a qualitative deep dive with farmers and relevant stakeholders to understand the lived experience around using the digital product and identify where the barrier to adoption actually lies. Second, we then conduct co-design workshops with the end users directly so that we ensure that any designed solution is done keeping the end user in mind and keeping their local context in mind. And then finally, we test these co-designed solutions with the farmers directly to verify whether they overcome the actual targeted barrier or not. Oftentimes, now, since morning, so many great cohort of speakers have spoken about challenges that we face across the ecosystem and the board, and many providers report barriers to adoption. Now, when I say barriers, these range from access challenges, capacity issues, non-compliance issues, despite being trained to use the digital service. And oftentimes, we also see solutions being deployed to target these barriers and challenges so as to improve adoption. But what we need to understand, and one of our biggest learnings at Busara also, is that farmers make decisions based on a complex web of factors, like social norms, beliefs, biases, and all of these influence the decision-making process of whether someone decides to use your product or not. And thus, one of our key takeaways that we will be looking at today, and I really recommend everyone to pay attention, is that the solution you design needs to be looking at the underlying factors that drive your barrier. Your barrier is just a symptom. It's an observed behavior. There are many, many underlying enablers and drivers that actually result in the observed barrier. Let's look at how. Okay. Oh, sorry. In the interest of time, I'm going to present an example from one of our works, but I'm happy to talk to you all about the rest at networking. We worked with the Goat Trust in India. The Goat Trust is a philanthropic non-profit organization that works in livestock management. Interesting that we are hosting today's conference at ILRI. How the Goat Trust goes about this is they employ women agents across various villages in India, and they train them to be entrepreneurs in their own village, because essentially these agents offer para-veterinary livestock services to their community farmers, and then they earn their income and earn a commission by selling animal feed and so on. Now this context setting is important. Now where does Busara come in? Now, these women agents are required to maintain a paper-based record of all the work they have done, in case they have to go and claim their commission, they want to prove how many farmers actually sold my feed to, and so on. So there is a handwritten register. Now, in order to reduce this digitization effort at the goat trust end to then sit and input all this manual data from the register, they wanted to switch to a digital data collection via a WhatsApp chatbot. Okay. And what they did is they made phones available at a subsidized cost to all of their women agents. The women agents were encouraged to purchase the phone at 50% the price. And then they were expected to record all of their work in the community via this WhatsApp chat. They were supposed to send daily updates. And Busara worked with them to understand what are the barriers that are stopping women, or what sort of contextual factors could we use to encourage women to really embrace this new way of digital data collection, right? Now, in terms of, what do you see on the screen? In terms of observed behaviors, at a very surface level, it appeared that women lack the capacity to use the functionalities, modalities of the phone and, send voice notes and WhatsApp photos, which the good trust expected them to do. And the other observed barrier was that women also tended to forget to share the updates on a daily basis. Now, when we were scoping this project with the good trust, if we were to look at just the observed barrier, one would perhaps think, oh, maybe we need to just do some more rigorous training sessions with the women to make sure that their phone capacity improves. Maybe we should send them reminders so that they share their daily updates, without forgetting. Surprise, surprise. This might not always work, and let's understand why. You see, for the subsidized phone, the family members have put in the remainder of the cost, okay? So automatically they feel a sense of ownership towards the phone. So the woman's time with the phone is very limited because it becomes a shared family resource, even though the Goat Trust made it subsidized only for the woman. In addition, because the value add of switching from register to WhatsApp was not clear neither for the agent nor for the family, nobody really prioritized the woman's use of the phone as to why. I mean, you have been doing an extension on register for all these years. Why do you suddenly need a phone? What are you going to do with a phone? Of course, there are also gender norms in terms of, gatekeeping that we've been discussing, or like husbands having suspicions of who are you texting, who are you speaking to. This is huge in rural parts of India. And of course, not to forget, very understandably, women have competing priorities of household duties, of childcare duties. So it is quite understandable that they would not remember to use a new digital data collection system. That's one. Second, very interestingly, we found that because this family-owned phone was used by children for entertainment purposes and basically used by everyone in the family, the woman was not really sure that if I do send my data, what if it gets deleted? It was not clear as to who is actually receiving this data at the Goat Trust end. Is it being securely stored or not? What if I have to go and access my records again? What happens? Because in the register, I'm able to flip the pages and show someone, hey, this is what I did in the last month. How does it work if I'm sending it on WhatsApp? Who is going to record my previous work? So there was like a fear of data loss and not having clarity on who is actually receiving and storing this data. So now with these underlying drivers clearly identified, we co-designed 2 solutions with women agents of the Goat Trust so that we could overcome these barriers and encourage them to send data to the Goat Trust on WhatsApp. The first that you see on your left is a training poster. You'll be surprised at and this is interesting because right at the round table we were discussing and somebody reported a 60 decibel survey that said, oh, 60% farmers have access to smartphones. But you would be surprised to know how many people actually know how to use WhatsApp, because swiping on YouTube and Instagram Reels is very easy. But taking WhatsApp, sending a voice note, joining a Google Meet meeting, and all the other digital expectations that the Goat Trust had of the women agents are not as straightforward as just scrolling through Reels. So we designed training posters to sort of build capacity of the women for independent use, so that then the women agents are not dependent on their children or their spouses to forever sit with them and help them to upload their daily data. That's one. Second, because they are, let's say, taped to a wall in the house, they act as visual cues for the family members to remind them that the woman agent, who is an extension worker for the Goat Trust, does need to use the mobile phone especially the WhatsApp feature, to send the data on a daily basis. The other co-design solution was actually what in behavioral language we call a nudge, where basically what we did is all we had to do on WhatsApp for business, is we had to incorporate a auto confirmation receipt, which means that every time somebody sends a picture or a voice note or any kind of data, this is in Hindi, the automatic message would say that, hey, we have received your data, don't worry, it's secure on our end. And then we were able to check, oh, how does the trust in digital data collection actually change when there is an auto confirmation message introduced? Idea being that these two solutions were designed because we looked at the underlying barrier and not just the observed or the surface behavior. Now, like I said, I think the main takeaway for us, and I promise I'll wrap it up, I'm not sure how many minutes I'm over, but early formative research is crucial, right? Because for adoption and for any kind of impactful sustainable behavior change, the solutions are going to be most successful when they target the real drivers. So let's take a quick look at how you can do it as well. The first is stakeholder mapping. So from our research, we have learned that there are 5 types of stakeholders who are digitized in various operational models. Okay, it really depends from provider to provider. So there are smallholder farmers, intermediary farmers, or lead farmers. They're also called representative farmers, depends on the provider. Then there are extension agents, agri-businesses, and the actual digital service providers, right? This stakeholder mapping is important because you're able to identify where do the barriers actually lie and whom should the solution be targeting. That's one. And the second reason why this is important is because based on the type of stakeholder digitized, your types of behavioral drivers are going to change. It's not consistent across all users. The stakeholder digitized is going to change your type of underlying behavioral barriers. The second step is journey mapping. So it's basically trying to understand all the steps that the user takes from start to finish so that you understand their experience right from learning about the product to actually using the product. This helps with sort of mapping out the observed barriers and also segregating them to a specific step instead of lumping them as a long list of barriers for the identified stakeholder. The typical steps along the journey map are awareness, access, use, and sustained use. And then finally, you need to unpack this observed barrier, right? And here is where in-depth research is crucial because you're trying to understand the local context of the user. So surveys, interviews, focus groups, types of qualitative methods is how you actually unpack this barrier. Essentially, you will find that most of these underlying drivers will be situated in 3 types. There's capacity, value, and trust. And a good way to sort of unpack this underlying barrier is to ask questions to your observed behavior. For example, let's say we are looking at it from a capacity lens. What you need to be asking is the design and the rollout of my product matching the skill set, the existing skill set of the end user, meaning that is not having capacity a standalone problem that you can address via training sessions, or is something in the operating environment of the user hindering their capacity to effectively engage with your product, right? Similarly for value, and this was the case with the Go Trust as well, as to is the added advantage of switching from your non-digital paper alternative methods to a digital method, is that abundantly clear? Is that value add being communicated? That is something to look at. And then finally, in terms of trust, right? So many times, they are not really showing a distrust in the product per se. They might have a negative previous experience because the face of the product in the field is the extension agent. So it's important to ask the question of, is the distrust stemming because of an experience with the product or an experience with the face of the product, who's essentially the messenger in the field. And that's it from me. Thank you so much for paying attention, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions?
there's one there.
All right, please go. You can just use the mic.
Just a quick question. Did you use nudge theory to also increase adoption of some of the messages or advisories or something that was sent in this initiative? Or was it just to...
So yeah, so we have incorporated nudge theory. We actually have a total of 6 projects under this grant. So I won't go into the research details of each, but I'm happy to chat with you later on in terms of we are working on adoption with other providers.
Okay, thanks a lot. Very interesting. Could we then move to Felix?
All right. Thank you, everyone. For those who might be joining online, thanks for joining and for hanging in there. Yeah. So I'm Felix Opola. I'm a social scientist based at the International Water Management Institute and the CGR Initiative for Digital Innovation. So starting off by the recommendations that Huda and June were talking about from the FAO report in terms of if you're going to promote digital innovation, digital inclusivity, then we need some standards or some ethical guidelines that we can all agree upon. And the second recommendation being it needs to be a collaborative effort. But then if you're going to collaborate, then we need to have a way of measuring social inclusion. So that's was our starting point in this in terms of looking at what are the parameters or metrics of social inclusion. And listening to all the various conversations today, there's youth being mentioned, there are women being mentioned, smallholder farmers, indigenous communities, indigenous knowledge. So there are so many different aspects from different organizations, different people. So the question then is, how can we bring all these different aspects into a common standard that we can all agree upon that are the right parameters to attain when we're talking of digital inclusivity? Yeah, so we've been talking about these figures all morning. Most of our food is produced by small farms. A lot of investment is made in digital technologies, but in terms of actual impact to small farms, there's still some gaps there. So I won't dwell much on that. But the question I want to dwell on is who is excluded? So we think these are 3, and Huda talked about this in the morning. No, this just in the previous session. There are different groups. First of all, there's issue related to access and use of digital tools, particularly to women. It's been talked about today. There are various reports and studies confirming that. A second group of people is people with little formal education. Most of our food, especially in Asia and Africa, is produced by people who are elderly and people who do not have, who have limited formal education. And these are the people who are likely to have problems in accessing and using digital tools. The other group is people with specific needs, digital tools, even simple tools like SMS, phone calls, interactive voice response require you to have good hearing, good eyesight, to be able to speak. So that it includes a large group of people who do not have these capabilities. The youth, digital tools are no longer mesmerizing or to people, even to the youth, even in rural areas, they have access to information. So for them, the question then is this tool safe to use? But also in rural areas, they may be able to gain access to smartphones, for example, but affordability of the data to use it may be an issue. And the other group of people is rural communities. Yeah, for them, the issue then will the digital innovation or a digital tool or service affect what they value or the norms they value as a community? So these are the major groups, and as Rhoda mentioned in the morning, there are intersections between these different groups. A woman can also be young and can also be deaf, or can also belong to a native or an indigenous community. So the approach then was to take a more general approach rather than focusing on one group of people because of these intersections. So how then do we measure inclusiveness? And we talk of inclusiveness rather than inclusion. If we want to make this conference more inclusive, we can include more people. For instance, local governments, farmers, for example. But then inclusiveness is about not just having them here, but the terms of the inclusion. The time that what they have to leave, for instance, if they're farmers, what they have to leave in order to come to participate in this conference. How do we deal with that? But also the nature of their participation here. Are they able to freely participate? So then we look at inclusiveness rather than inclusion. So inclusion, but also the terms of inclusion. So it moves away from this linear model of participation. So we need more people or access. So we've developed a tool. We need to make it more accessible to more people, but looking at more at a circular into circular perspectives. And at Ram mentioned in the morning, it takes a community to solve a problem. So a digital tool is not a solution itself, but it helps. It can help a community to solve a problem. So looking at inclusion from that circular perspective and looking at the process of developing and applying the solution rather than the technology as an output and making it accessible. So, so these are what we think are the key issues to look at when you're talking about digital inclusion or digital inclusiveness. This is, we started off by a literature review looking at published reports, looking at words like digital divide, information technology for development, digital inclusiveness, digital inclusivity, data justice, data rights. So looking at all these aspects of justice and fairness and inclusion, and bring them together into what we think would be the key parameters of digital inclusivity. But an additional step that we did was discussing this with different stakeholders from the government, from the private sector, other research institutes, in order to agree on these parameters or metrics. So there are 7 different dimensions, can be categorized into 3. The first one is more about usage of the digital service or tool. So more about how accessible the tool is. So in terms of digital infrastructure, affordability of the tool, a lot has been talked, has been mentioned concerning that. But the other issue about innovation usage is how usage effectiveness. So ease of use, things like digital literacy, digital literacy and skills. The other aspect of innovation usage is whether there's a support system to use that innovation. Most rural communities or farmers living in rural areas have a network of people that they rely on to make decisions. And they look at their neighbor, they look at their family, they look at their friends, and that helps them make decisions on whether a tool is useful or appropriate or not. But also family members usually support their parents, like daughters or sons support their parents in using the tool. So this tool is used communally rather than individually. So then the other aspect of inclusion, innovation usage is where there's that support to use the technology or tool. The other dimension of inclusion is the social consequences. So looking at the risk of the tool, which has been mentioned before. So there are risks in terms of if the tool is going to replace, for instance, a weather forecasting tool, and it's going to replace traditional norms or traditional methods of weather forecasting, then the risk there is loss of that knowledge. For instance, a lot of communities in Kenya, for instance, have these experts who use cloud patterns and bird migration patterns and certain worms, the movement of certain worms to forecast weather. If digital tools are going to replace that system, then there's loss of not just that skill, but loss of knowledge on these bird species and worm species and their migration patterns. So the digital tool can have that risk, but digital tools can also help to preserve this knowledge. So as was mentioned before, it's about how the tool is used rather than the tool itself that leads to inclusion or exclusion. So beneficial impact is whether the problem being addressed by the tool is relevant to the targeted groups of people, and whether that solution can be sustained in the long run. And the other aspect of inclusion has to do with the nature of the stakeholder relationships, because they're usually power relations between, let's say, Calro as a research institute or any other, or a private technology developer, for instance, and the smaller older farmers that they work with. How are those power relationships dealt with in terms of having ethical and responsible innovation processes? So for instance, things to do with data governance, how data that is collected is managed. For instance, if there's a platform or a database with 6 million farmers, this is information on their cell phones, where they live, their socioeconomic conditions. There's risk that this data can leak, but also because it's big, this data can be commercialized. So there's the risk of data misappropriation. And so one aspect of ethical and responsible innovation is whether there's proper governance structures to manage this data. And the other part of the stakeholder relationships is co-creation, whether there are initiatives to co-create knowledge with, let's say, indigenous forms of weather forecasting and more technology-based ways of weather forecasting, whether there are opportunities for that co-creation. So we've developed around 70 indicators based around this. Yeah, we call that a multidimensional digital inclusivity index. So looking at all the various parameters of digital inclusion. And the aim then is to develop a score for us, a certain digital solution, to develop a score based on this. And so how it works then, I'm going to skip this because it's presented in the next slide. Yeah, so the whole idea is with these parameters, with these different dimensions, there's an initiator. Initiator can be a tool developer, but can also be a government organization, can be ILRI, but any organization or individual that identifies a problem and looks for resources to solve that problem. So initiates the digital innovation, basically. And so the idea is to have the potential targeted users of this tool. Let's say this case, a smallholder farmer living in Kenya or Bangladesh, to have them evaluate the tool. But these smallholder farmers does not have the entire vision of the tool, because the issues to do with data governance, for instance, that they might not know. So then there's need for certain domain-specific experts. So someone who's an expert in data rights, for example, or data laws, someone who is an expert in gender and social inclusion, to also be part of the evaluation. So in the end, the initiator provides information on the tool in terms of what it's supposed to address, in terms of digital inclusivity, who it's targeting, the problem the tool is supposed to address. Then the evaluator also provides information on how useful that tool, the targeted beneficiary, in this case, a smallholder farmer, it also evaluates the tool in terms of how relevant the problem is, for example, how useful the tool is. And then we have these domain-specific evaluators using both information from the initiator and the targeted user. I'm using the word user for lack of a better word, to give the score. So in the end, we will have a score based on how inclusive the tool is, based on accessibility, based on risks, based on benefits, based on all those 7 different dimensions, and then give recommendations for inclusion based on those scores. So basically, that's the idea of the index, and this is an example of an actual innovation that we evaluated based on the index. But this is a previous version when we were when we were developing the index. So in terms of infrastructure, for example, it's a neutral score because it has a very data reliable platform. This is a call center. It's free to access for farmers to call in to access information. But this was in Ghana. In northern Ghana, mobile connectivity it's quite low. So that's why it didn't score so high. But in some cases, in some indicators, it's scored really high. In some indicators, it's scored really low. So in the end, we aggregate all these scores and we give a score for each of those 7 dimensions. Yeah, so just to wind up, that's the tool in a nutshell. But we realized that there might be specific issues related to the gender, as was mentioned before. But the challenge of specifically focusing on gender, or specifically focusing or intentionally focusing on women and girls, is there's a risk of mirroring pre-existing inequalities in society. For instance, we're in societies already, there are already perceptions that women are more technophobic compared to men, or they have low digital literacy skills compared to men. So if we use the same approach, saying that one of the key issues is in terms of technology, digital exclusion is women are less digitally literate compared to men, then there's that risk of mirroring those inequalities. So we decided to focus on agency instead. And basically the idea we want to measure is, or what we want to measure is whether the tool is empowering or disempowering to groups of women. So whether it helps them in making decisions, so intrinsic agency within, whether it helps them to, let's say, acquire assets, because that can be the fact that phone ownership can have agency in itself. In terms of it can make a woman or a girl more confident in expressing themselves or making decisions. Just the fact that they own an asset. Collective agency is whether the tool can enhance ownership to influential social groups. Yeah, so this is still in the development, is a module outside of the index that we're still developing. But the other key issue I'd like to mention in summarizing is collecting. These are almost 70 indicators, and we need to collect data from different actors in order to give the score. It can be a very intense process. And so what we are thinking of doing is whether the process can be automated without compromising on the value of the index. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Any quick questions? Okay, please. We were expecting that, sir.
Hello, can you hear me? No.
Press it.
It doesn't get started, but it's fine.
Oh, yeah.
It's fine. No, very interesting experience. No, I'm just interested to learn if the index has been piloted yet, and what's your strategy in getting like the initiator of digital solutions to like use it. So you ensure more uptake of the index before they introduce the digital solution into the community or the market.
Yeah, so across, I'll start with the second question. So across the parameters, there are those that we can evaluate when an idea is conceptualized, even before the tool is developed. So then at that stage, we can evaluate how inclusive the tool is before it's developed. So most of the parameters actually can be evaluated before the tool is developed. And the second question, I'm forgetting the question. Piloted. Okay, yeah. Actually, we are starting. We did a mini with the example I mentioned in Ghana. We are still testing the tools, so we did kind of a mini version of the index in that. But we are starting to pilot it in across, if I'm not wrong, 6 countries across Africa, 2 in Middle East, and Pakistan. And we're starting to do that in July, between July and September. But these are mostly water-related tools. So drought, early warning systems for drought and floods, for example, irrigation dashboards, for example. Yeah.
Any more questions? Okay. If that be so, thanks a lot, Felix. Thanks for the very interesting presentation. So that concludes this session. A big round of applause for both the speakers.